This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
So I got a cell phone here that says 4 p.m. So we're going to start our meeting this afternoon. This is the meeting of the Evaluation Committee. It's a public meeting, so I asked Greg to start the reporter. I'm Mike Owens. I'm the procurement officer, as you all know. With us is Emily Ines. Ennis, who's going to help us out today to go through some of these proposals. I first want to talk about my review for minimum qualifications that I spoke about at our last meeting. I went through each proposal to see if they met minimum qualifications. Emily did as well. We did find a problem with Arch Communities. Okay, they failed to give us a breakdown of units lost or units gained in terms of the PEP and gym, and they did not provide us extensive financial information regarding their company's background or any extensive financial information related to their proposal. Were those the two areas you were concerned about, Emily?
There's a couple of others. They have a partial response to 6, which is the narrative response to Section 5 evaluation criteria.
That's right, correct.
And a partial response to 7, which was the narrative describing provisions for affordable housing, which they did address, but they did not address lease-up or marketing strategies, and they did not. They talked about ownership over the next 15 years. They didn't really go into management.
Okay.
So again, a partial answer.
So there are some shortfalls associated with Arch Communities' proposal. They, in my opinion, they have not met minimum qualifications. However, there is language in the RFP which allows the city to waive informalities, waive missing pieces of documentation, and review the proposal regardless. If we had received 7 or 8 proposals, I think my recommendation to the committee would be Arch Communities gets tossed out. They didn't meet minimum requirements. Because we only have 3 proposals, I'm suggesting to the committee that we waive those informalities or missing pieces of information and include them in our review. That would mean we are going to review all of the 3 submitted proposals. That would be Wayfinders for 1 building, Maple School, Arch Communities, their proposal to redevelop the 3 school buildings, and the National Housing Partnership, who is proposing to do 3 of the school buildings. I'm going to just throw that out to the committee for discussion at this time. What do you think, folks? How do we feel about including Arch Communities in our review, even though there's some question whether they've met minimum qualifications?
I think it makes sense to include them for review, and this is a process that we would allow them to provide missing information as we go forward, right? So if we identify the areas of deficiency to them, that's something that they can provide us as we move forward.
I'm going to defer to Emily. We discussed this early this afternoon. We're in agreement on this.
Yeah, we discussed that we could ask them, rather than saying now you have to provide it to us, because we've got them scheduled for an interview on Monday, that we would ask them in the interview to address the missing components.
And are we going to give them a heads up of what we found to be deficient before the interview? So
We will, but my sense is that we cannot ask them to supplement their proposal with additional documentation. They should be prepared to discuss our 2 or 3 concerns with missing information in the proposal at their presentation. But I don't think it would be fair to the other proposers to allow them to submit supplemental data at this time.
Especially because the other proposals are public at this point.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Now, if Arch Communities ends up being our top-rated proposal, it will be the purview of the City Council to ask for additional information in terms of the proposal they submitted to us, as well as any other information they want from the top-rated proposal. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, if they rise to the top out of the 3, and that recommendation goes to City Council, City Council can then ask for them to supplement their proposal.
That single
Yeah,
one, yes.
that
You can't
single
ask for
one.
the others, yes.
If they are chosen as the top,
Yeah.
if they rise to the top in terms of our overall review.
I have a question. You know, the breakdown of units, loss and gain, and the gym. It wasn't clear to me that the other proposal had that in total clarity either. So that's just a little
Yes.
conversation piece. And then I do think the financial information related to the proposal. So what did the other proposals provide? Was it a difference between a bank letter and a bank's? What were the differences, I guess, that you guys
Yeah.
saw with that?
For the financial documentation.
For the
Yeah.
financial documentation.
Some folks gave us bank references.
Yes.
Other folks gave us letters of commitment from banks to be
Right.
involved in the project.
Right. So one basically said, hey, you can call our bankers if you want to find out about our financial stability. The others gave, as Michael described, letters of commitment saying we would finance you up to this point. In one case, we got multiple letters of commitment for the financing. So that's more what we were looking for. That, you know, based on the other proposal that I've worked, or the RFP I'd worked on, that was standard response, is these letters of commitment to say that they have the resources to do the project.
And so if we did move forward with interviewing them, we could potentially ask a general question about that, and they might respond that we have since gotten the letters of commitment, but we didn't include them, or
Right,
because
I think,
because they
yeah.
check our references and.
I mean, we talked about the idea of having some basic questions that we would ask everybody, and then some that were specific to each proposal. And so I think for the proposal that didn't have the letters of commitment, I believe we could ask them for those.
I believe we could, but
Yes.
I also believe that the proposers, based on the proposals they submitted, all have fairly good track records of producing affordable housing projects. So that's something to take
Right.
into consideration. Do we need the actual, it's certainly nice, and the proposal is more thorough when you provide a letter of commitment from your banker. We will commit $2 million to this
That
project.
was the evidence of financial stability that we
Yes.
were looking
Yeah, that we were
for. So,
looking
yes,
for, yeah.
so, you know, again, to your point earlier, the city council could also request those if it rises to the top.
Yes.
If it's not rising to the top, it might not be worth asking them to provide something. if
Becomes a
they-
moot issue.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So-
Same with Arch Communities and the several lacking pieces in their proposal.
Yes.
If they don't rise to the top, it becomes a moot issue.
Right, right. But your point was good, is that one of the others did not talk. They addressed that there were some options, but they didn't go into, I think, the depth of information that we were expecting on those. I think that for both of the proposals that keep the gym and the auditorium in their different formats, I think asking them to explain the difference between keeping them versus not keeping them, the totally legitimate question for the interviews.
For the interviews.
Yeah, and I would recommend that we do that. Because I think that's, the proposals for the gym and the auditorium are a significant difference between those two.
So, and if I understand it correctly, this committee would have a decision to make if we were to waive the strict compliance, it would allow us to interview them
Right.
and ask questions, and they could answer them in a variety of different ways. We would then still score them and see how they score. Or we find that they didn't comply strictly and we eliminate them, meaning that we don't interview them and they don't
And
get
then you're not
ranked.
scoring
Right.
them, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Basically, that choice is keep, interview, score, or eliminate, and they are no longer part of the mix at that point. You've effectively rejected, so.
And there is language in the RFP that would be allowed.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you
I can
recall
find-
which page that was on?
It's on like 28 and 29, because we I looked at language earlier, 27 and 28.
That's where I always go, like, what's the SIF test?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. There's two different places. So one is specific to this committee, saying that you'll interview all responsive. So you could say that they're not responsive, but the key piece is on page 27, and it's got D, which is under proposal terms and conditions.
City's option.
Yeah, city's option.
City reserves the right to cancel this RFP, to reject in whole or in part any and all proposals received in response to this RFP upon its determination that such cancellations or rejections are in the best interests of the city. The city further reserves the right to waive any minor informality, any proposals received, if such waiver is in the city's best interests. The determination of the criteria and process by which proposals are evaluated, the decisions as to which shall receive a contract award or whether or not an award shall be made as a result of this RFP shall be at the sole and absolute discretion of the city. And I think the phrase there is city further reserves the right to waive any minor informality in any proposal received if such waiver is in the city's best interests. I believe it's in the city's best interest to talk to interview all three proposers and do an evaluation on all three proposers, and that's my recommendation to the committee.
I agree.
Greg, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think our Arch, their proposal being deficient, as long as that doesn't open us up to any type of, should they end up being the successful party, that doesn't open us up to any liability or litigation or anything from
From the other
NHB,
parties?
say
No,
theirs was more complete.
I don't believe it will.
Yeah, I think it's very worthwhile to talk to Arch because they do have experience working in Easthampton, having done 15 Cottage, and
Yes.
I just think there's something to be said for that.
So just I think Emily and I discussed that earlier today. Simply having an opportunity to have another proposer in front of this evaluation committee that we can propose the same basic questions to that we're asking the other two people. It's always useful to hear those answers, see how the respondents think about those answers in their own mind in relation to their own proposal and how they relate to us on that level.
I think too, as long as we offer everybody the opportunity that if we see something
Sure.
minor
Yeah.
in here,
They can correct.
that we're giving them all that same opportunity.
Mhm.
So, for the second one that didn't quite answer the question, we gave them the same opportunity to address it.
Yeah.
So, and then they're seeing that we're being fair to all three respondents.
I'm on board with the same opinion. I think it would just seem a little too early for us to dismiss them.
Yeah.
And we'd like to advance them to the interview to hear how they respond to some of the questions, knowing that we still have to do the ranking after that, and they may be able to verbally respond in a way that meets the intent. But I think it would still give us a chance to find out if there's something that we feel is not answered, especially the financial information.
Right.
I think the people who are paying attention to this would expect us to move at least the two a little further to vet them, against the criteria.
And as we sit here, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that if we're looking at Arch and they didn't provide their proof of availability of funding, we're looking at the proof. We're literally staring at it.
Yeah.
Because that's their project right there.
Yes.
So that speaks louder than a piece of paper from a banker to me, that
Yeah.
they can get the funding for a project. So I feel like that right there qualifies them.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to track record of these three proposers, they all have good track records of producing desired affordable housing projects in the Commonwealth, many areas across the country.
So I think there's two things that we wanted to accomplish today. The first is the initial ranking by this committee of the three proposals, understanding that we'll re-rank after the interviews, but this is just the first pass at it. And then the second thing is, as we were discussing this earlier today, we'd like to offer probably a base 3 to 4 questions that they'll all answer as part of their presentation. So we're going to have an interview, they'll have 15 minutes to present, We want all three of them to be answering the same questions in that presentation, and then letting them know that we will have specific follow-up questions based on their proposal. Jeff sent out an email to city councilors asking for any questions they want, so we'll have a body of questions. I think the other thing in terms of the interview is 15 minutes for their presentation, 15 minutes for questions, is discussing whether or not we want each committee member to have a question to ask, or is it one committee member? What we don't want is kind of like, 15 minutes is not a lot of time to ask and answer questions, so we want to make sure that we have it organized among ourselves. So, and I will be listening in, but as the consultant, I don't have a role to play in the interview, so I want to make sure that all of you are comfortable. We're going to have you sort of run the interview process.
Willing
Yes.
to run the interview process. I'm willing to ask all the questions if that's the committee's preference.
Or you
I'm
may
willing-
feel that you have, you
Yeah.
want to each ask one, and then, just to see what the different responses
Or
are.
defer to committee members for follow-up questions, if that's your
Yeah,
preference.
exactly.
There's lots of flexibility here that the committee should consider.
So what might make sense is to do the ranking first, because that, I think, will lead to some of the interview questions, and then wrap up with the interview questions of the interview process, if that makes sense. And what I'm going to do is, I have the spreadsheet in front of me, the score sheet in front of me. I'm just going to take down your consensus response. So feel free to debate. I mean, obviously it's being recorded as well, but the thing that goes forward as a record is the consensus of the group, not, each individual vote, because I think there's going to be a back and forth in the discussion.
Yes,
So,
correct. Yeah, we expect that.
and I also did go through and just make some notes of all three, like what the unit mixes were for all three, what the affordability mixes for all three. So, if we get to a question where I have some of that information, I'll share it. But, the scoring is up to all of you all. Just to look over here.
And number 13, we won't discuss today because that's the scoring on the
Yes,
interview.
yes, don't score them on the interview until afterwards.
Yep, until
Very
after.
important.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I backtrack really quickly?
No, not at all, please.
Because so when I looked at the Arch Street project, they didn't have letters of reference like the other one, the NHP one.
Yes.
But they did put in their references. Now, is that on us to reach out to those references to get?
Yes.
So what I'm saying is they got the letters of recommendation, but they gave us the so one is a permanent lender, and the other one's the equity investor. So are we overlooking that as our due diligence?
No, because everybody
Okay.
was supposed to give references, and the
Okay.
idea is that you'll call the reference. You could do it, you could call all three, or if there's a clear outstanding one, you could call just the references for
Okay,
that
so I guess
outstanding
I
one.
was just confused if
Yeah.
we just got a letter of recommendation and we didn't call the reference on, they're kind of
Yeah,
relatively similar.
Yeah.
It says one requires less work.
One's an apple, one's an orange. They're
they
close,
all
though.
submitted
They're fruits,
references,
yeah.
but
Okay.
two of them also submitted the funding commitment. They're actually not letters of recommendation, they're funding commitment
Okay.
letters.
Commitment letters,
So,
yeah.
and that's kind of what we were looking for, that if Group A is chosen, that they have the resources to do the project, is
Yeah.
what we were.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah.
That was just a clarification.
And to be honest with everyone, that's one of the reasons that NHP rose to the top in terms of my personal evaluation. I mean, I just want to just throw this out there right now. I had, looked through all of these. I initially threw out Arch Communities and had my conversations with both Jeff and Emily and realized, no, we really want those guys in there. So my rankings come down to last ranked is Wayfinders. Pretty much because they were willing only to take on one site.
Yeah, that was,
They're also not proposing to preserve the building, which was expressed by the community as something worthwhile. These buildings have been around for a long time. They have familiarity and character in the town. And I think that I think those were the two big ones for me for Wayfinders. I thought they had great experience. Their financial status looked fine. Pro formers were generally acceptable. Only undertaking one site hurt them in my mind.
Can I ask you a
And
quick
and for
question?
that reason,
Yeah.
they were ranked the lowest.
When I was looking at the Wayfinders one, when under the pro forma, I couldn't find what they were offering for the, maybe it just could have been, I just didn't, I
They
overlooked
were
it.
offering $1 for the site, you were looking for the
Yeah.
fee,
Yeah.
it's $1,
Yeah.
it was in the text,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't find it. It's
Yeah.
so small.
I mean,
There were a couple of different financial components, so
Yes.
each of them identified a purchase price they'd be willing to pay. When you looked at the actual pro formas, one of them had a line item in the budget for taxes, but they didn't specifically state whether or not those were property taxes. So Arch had a line item for taxes. NHP did not have a line item for taxes, or I didn't see one. Wayfinders did have a line item, and it was specific to property taxes. So they
Well-
called out how much they'd be paying in property taxes over 20 years, based on their unit mix, obviously.
Right,
So
and that was a question I wanted to ask, which was, okay, so if NHP is a nonprofit,
Right.
if Wayfinders is a nonprofit, which I think they are,
you know,
so does that mean that the properties that they develop and manage are then tax exempt?
no.
We had this
Not
conversation.
necessarily.
Okay,
Because I had the
I
same
want to,
question.
this is something that is going to be
Yeah.
extremely important.
It will
Right.
be, yes.
And so this needs to be as clear as we can absolutely get it.
Right.
This may be a question we may want to ask during the
Yes.
interviews. I will give you a real-world example, though. Parsons Village over in New City.
Yep.
Joint project developed by Wayfinders and the Valley CDC. The owner of the property is an LLC. That LLC does pay property taxes to the city. We would imagine that this project, or these projects, 3 school buildings, would be done in a similar manner.
Okay, because, well, I
That is
know,
worth
I know that
confirming.
Arch
Yes.
specifically stated that an LLC would be
Yes.
Yeah.
retaining ownership and under control.
Mhm.
I didn't get that from the other two.
Right.
Yes.
Because that should be one of our
Yeah.
Yes.
ranking
Yeah.
criterias. If-
Yes. There is a cost-benefit analysis to constructing these buildings here in Easthampton, just like any other community.
Sure.
And-
We
yeah.
need folks to pay their fair share of taxes.
Yeah.
And that's no
Especially
question about it.
when we have a big
And
project.
that's number
Yes.
12 in the pro formas. So there's the direct financial benefit to the city in there.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's one of the criteria.
I would expect that either, and this may be another question for the interview, if a nonprofit is going to hold ownership to these properties, is the developer, the nonprofit, willing to execute a pilot agreement with the city
Right.
for payment in lieu of taxes? Or is your model more of a LLC that will be responsible for property taxes?
And there are a couple of components that come into the financial benefit to the city, and they each called out the components differently. So there's the purchase price. 2 of them mentioned that they were going to use the 40R district. One did not actually specifically state that they were using the 40R. But if they use the 40R district, then there's payments to the city. I actually had a question about that because I thought one of them may have overstated how much the city would get. So we need to talk about where you are in the 40R on that, because I thought they might have been overreaching, so.
One of them referred to their previous project as
Yes.
having generated 450,000.
Yes,
And I read it the first time and it sounded like they were going to be generating that, but it was a reference to what the
Exactly.
previous project generated.
that was
So
the
that
one
was-
who
yes, it-
didn't specify that they were using, I assumed they were using 40R because they've already used in the past.
Mhm.
They didn't specify it. One of them said they were using it and the state, and the city would get a $600,000 payment from the state plus X amount per unit. I
seems
thought you only
high.
got the 600,000 once,
Correct.
but I haven't, so I think that's high. And we should-
Correct.
They may not have realized that it's been used already.
And we would only get the calculation per unit.
Yes,
3,000 per unit is roughly
Yes.
what it is. But the question that I had about that was, it's not automatic that
Yes.
the money would go back to that project.
right,
It would generate the revenue that typically goes to the city, then the city would have a decision to make.
right.
So that would be important. The other thing, just on this conversation, under the Arch Communities proposal, they discussed a TIF, tax
Yes, I saw
incremental
that,
financing.
yeah.
So two parts to that. It leads me to believe that they would anticipate tax revenue,
Right.
but that they want to negotiate a TIF, which basically lowers the amount of tax that they will pay and
Yes.
establishes on a schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas the NHP proposal had no reference to that. So that would be a good interview
And
question, is to
Yes.
clarify.
Yeah, and Wayfinders didn't have it. And then the other components, we've already talked about property taxes, but there's also building permit fee and other fees that would come as part of the construction. One of them called it out under pro forma. I don't believe the others did. So I think you might consider as a committee, can you give us, based on your pro forma, what you anticipate to be the total benefit to the city? Because I don't think any of them stated it. And we
They
break
didn't
out the
really- they didn't
components
drill
to it.
down
They did
far.
not drill out. So we
Yeah.
could either break out the components, or we could ask them to break it out.
Sure.
And we should let them know that the 40R has already been used, so they can't rely on that.
Yeah, so we're building up some questions here, folks. We got the
Absolutely.
40-yard district, using it or not using it.
Yeah.
We have, under your model of development,
Yeah.
will the city receive property taxes through an LLC ownership? Or are you proposing to do a pilot agreement under the nonprofit ownership of the property? Then there's tip versus no tip.
Right.
Further explain overall benefits to the city, including what building department fees might be generated as a result of the development or the 3 developments.
I think your third one that goes in sort of this bucket is who's doing the ongoing management. One identified that they'd be hiring a property manager, like an individual. And I think one other person, so they'd have 2 people on site because they actually listed their jobs. One has a company that does their property management.
Mhm.
There's a whole host of things that they talked about in there. I think the third had a company, but maybe wasn't as specific. So understanding who's going to own the property and who's going to manage the property, because they may be different things. I think you should, that management has a huge ongoing impact for, residents and for the city.
neighbors,
So,
residents,
absolutely.
parents of the property.
So
a whole
understanding
range
who
of
you're gonna
things.
call.
Yes.
Both during construction management, but also post-construction, during occupancy, who's managing it there, you should really consider that.
And the only other questions I was thinking about in terms of, came back to this tenant selection model that they talk about. I would really love to see this, whoever is the preferred developer, have some sort of formal reach out to our Chamber of Commerce, identify, one of the challenges here for the business community in the town is workers can't live here. We had a snowstorm the other day. Half the restaurants in town were closed. Now, I don't know if that was because they just didn't expect anyone to come out and eat, or that their employees couldn't get here because they don't live close by. I think if you talk to businesses out there, that would be on their radar screen. Affordable housing for folks that are service employees here in the city. How do they intend to do their marketing to those
Yes.
individuals? We see a direct benefit when service folks can work here and live here, not just work here, but have to drive to East Long Meadow because it's the only place they can find an affordable housing apartment to rent.
And that discussion about,
Chickadee,
tenant lease up was different for each. So I think that's a good one for you really to understand the differences among all of them.
Is part of that conversation possibly too, how soon they can or are able to take control of the buildings to remove some of our responsibility?
Yes.
Yes, because that was also different for each. So
It was different for each.
Arch was a little bit tricky. They had 30 months from designation. NHP and Wayfinders were both fall 2024, but I actually had to do some parsing to kind of figure that out. Then construction start was different for each of them, and occupancy was different for each of them.
I also felt like for the NHP and Wayfinders were both a little nebulous. Like
They were a little bit.
around 18. There was no specific. Granted, it's going to be hard.
They had some caveats.
But I would, that being said, I would take all those numbers with a grain of salt
Mhm.
because knowing the number of variables that go in, it's like in 10. So, and I imagine, so that makes that ranking a little bit more difficult because intent is hard.
One thing I noticed though on that is that the NHP proposal was the one with the
18 to 22 months?
no, it was the acquisition price was 1.28 million, and they in their
That's,
narrative.
The other one,
That's
that's.
our
Arch. Okay, so
Yeah.
sorry, in
It's
Arch.
500 for NH.
Okay, so in Arch's proposal, at least in the narrative, they say that the $1.2 million was intended to recover the cost of the city over the periods of
Carrying
time.
costs.
Yeah.
I think there is a level of unpredictability about how long it will
Right.
take.
Mhm.
But at least the Arch narrative said that $1.2 million was intended to cover those carrying costs during that
Right.
time.
I mean, what we appropriated 125 last night for the
This current year?
Yeah.
Or-
Well, we could carry that through till it runs out.
Right.
And I'm optimistic, hoping that
It'll
will
go
get us.
through,
Take us through.
Go through October,
next
18
November.
months.
One of them quoted, I think, 62,000 a year. The other one had a slightly higher figure in there, which they had taken from documents from the city, but it's worth discussing that update.
It's a mild winter. I mean, the electric bills are fairly low, but the heating costs to keep them in the
Yeah.
condition they're in is, and there's some substantial attention that we've been giving to them, to keep them.
But so the answer to your first question was the length of time is a factor? Isn't that a
Yes.
factor in the criteria? So it's a good
Yes.
question.
Having them explain their timeline in more detail, I think would be an
I think it's good.
excellent
Yeah.
question, yeah.
I mean, right now, Wayfinders is saying 18 months, with a little bit of caveat language in there. But that's probably acceptable to them. They're only looking at one site.
Yeah.
They could probably get that done in 18 months.
Yeah.
Well, that's
well,
interesting
and
though,
the-
because
the
when you look at
raising
their
of the building.
timeline, they are later for occupancy than NHP were.
Yes.
Arch was the hardest to decipher because they just gave it a number of months where the
Mhm.
others had tables that
Yeah.
showed the.
I think
year
NHP
of
went from like
season.
18 to 23 or 24
Yeah.
months,
Mhm.
which seems reasonable. I mean, at least they answered the question.
Right.
Arch really didn't address it.
Well, I think one thing we have to consider too, should we go with Wayfinders? Do we lose Arch and NHP because now one property that they have in their plan is
Yes,
Yeah.
it's,
Change the whole-
you can't mix and match.
Yeah.
So you either, you get to choose one, you can't say, well, we're gonna give this to, respondent A, but maybe B
Yeah,
and
B
C.
can have, yeah,
Yeah,
choices
no,
2
you
and 3.
can't
I
do
mean, that's
that,
kinda-
yeah.
This was my question, because then what do we do with two other buildings?
Yes.
You would
Yeah,
have to
go out to the RFP
re-RFP.
process.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So now we're way past 18 months, if my math adds up.
So I think if we want to be able to consider the other two, we kind of have to immediately say, any Wayfinders is,
And there's a criteria in there so that you can put
Yeah.
not advantageous for
Yeah.
those. At some point, we do need to start filling these
Yeah,
out. But I think this
number-
beginning
yeah.
discussion is very helpful.
Number 6 is number of sites in the proposal.
Yes.
You're not advantageous if you only have one site,
Yeah.
and you get, so.
And
I mean,
remembering, this is the first crack, so
Mhm.
you may
I mean,
find after the interview that you have more detail.
Yeah, in my mind right now, and I've read through all the proposals twice, I took a shot at a draft marking out the scoring. And right now, the lowest ranked proposal would be Wayfinders. The second ranked proposal would be Arch Communities, and my top ranked proposal, as it stands now, would be the NHP Foundation. So,
Well, it's-
and I'm just relating that to the committee for your own information. That doesn't mean we're going to do this by consensus, but that's what my sense is for my personally at this point in time.
That's interesting, since these aren't, because we talked the last time about weighting, right?
Yes.
Like weighting the different numbers, because like 6
Yeah.
basically is canceled out by 8,
Yeah.
Right.
right?
Yes.
So, which is new construction, and I mean, I guess the other two do have some components of new, or no, maybe it's Arch has a component
Arch
of new
has
construction.
three-family potential.
But three-family
yes.
potential, which was another thing, that's again a little nebulous because it wasn't a hard piece of their proposal. It was one that this is a potential piece, which would make it would make a lot of sense.
It's 6 and 7, so it's the number of sites. So
Yep.
7 and 8 kind of knock each other out,
Yep.
but 6 would be weighted more towards the ones that keep all 3
Keep all
sites.
3,
So,
Mhm.
just so you know, I have not scored these. I went through to pull out the information that was similar across all, the categories that were similar, but it's your job to weight, not mine. So I have not weighted these. Or this committee's job, not my job, so.
And to kind of go, I guess, go off what Michael did, is a quick look at this.
Yeah.
I agree that there's a lot of trading to criteria, but
Mhm.
I do notice that if going with the first one, so affordable housing, the Arch proposal in theory would get an advantageous because they include a number of market rate units, whereas NHP and Wayfinders are 100% affordable.
No, Wayfinders has market rate
Okay.
as well.
Market rate as
yeah.
well,
Okay,
yeah.
so
They have 16 market
okay,
rate.
thank you.
Yes.
So
That was one of
on
the things.
that one criteria, I see a difference
There
of
is a
them,
difference
and
there,
then
yeah.
where I've been having a little bit of struggle is the gym and auditorium, and then the community connections.
Mhm.
So if you look at the gym and auditorium, there's a difference between Arch
There is.
and NHP, and then there's a difference between Arch and NHP with regard to public parking.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they're the same on green space, but on
Mhm.
parking there's a difference.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm close to having them ranked the same, except there's 2 criteria that I think are different.
And that's where I'm at too,
Sorry.
and because I ranked for the retaining pep and gym and auditorium, I gave Arch a highly advantageous, and I gave NHP an advantageous.
Right.
And I will say, just as, not necessarily that I know anything more than anybody else, but I do know that the preservation of the gym is a significant factor, at least as it relates to the council
Mhm.
and the sentiment on the council, and
We heard
also
that.
in the public.
Yeah.
We heard that throughout the development of the RFP.
Yeah, so I just, so I put that as highly advantageous. And now the parking, that was another one. NHP specifically stated 19 public parking spaces.
Yes.
Arch mentioned parking spaces and the potential for public parking spaces without a number as it related to the 3-bedroom units
Exactly.
in the new construction.
Yes.
Mhm.
They said we
So
could
it's-
do either or.
And
yes.
and one of the things that kind of stood out to me there was, 19 parking spaces, but if they're not paying taxes.
Yeah.
Right, so that was where I was kind of like where we need to ask questions.
Right.
And so, because 19 parking spaces without a pilot agreement or without property taxes is different than, an unknown number of public parking spaces with, a known quantity of taxes coming to the city.
So why don't we go, because we've started with this, why don't we just go through and knock off the easy ones?
Okay.
And then figure out what the more difficult ones. So affordable housing, Arch communities, not advantageous, advantageous, highly advantageous. So they are 87% affordable, 13% market. They're offering 8 at 30% AMIs, 45 at 60% AMI, and then the remainder 8 at market rate.
I marked them as advantageous.
So my question here was about this maximum AMI of greater than 80%. So if we're picking between like not advantageous and advantageous, I think their maximum was 60%? Does that count,
Their maximum's actually market rate, which
Market
is
rate.
above.
Oh, I see,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
So that would be like saying 100%.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. And just so you know, this is set up so you get a 1 for not advantageous, a 2 for advantageous, and a 3 for highly advantageous. So they do have a maximum AMI of greater than 80% because they have the market rate units.
Anyone else for?
I put them at highly advantageous.
Highly
Because it was, were we talking about Arch right now?
We're talking about Arch.
Yeah.
Still talking about Arch.
Yeah, okay.
So I put them as advantageous because we don't know why exactly, but they included the market rate units. whereas NHP has 100% of the units that's
100%
affordable,
affordability,
which
yeah.
I think was the overarching goal, was
Right.
to achieve that.
The reason why I put that is because I feel like mixed rate living
Mixed
environment,
income.
mixed income living
Yeah.
environments are a better model than all affordable. I think that people from all incomes should be neighbors.
Yeah. I marked it as highly advantageous.
It's a fair point.
Given that, because I tried to think about it not in comparison, but just as this criteria here. Proposal provides units across a wide range of AMIs with maximum of 80% and family sizes, and they had
that becomes a question, which is, you've all ranked something that's either advantageous or highly advantageous that has a maximum AMI of greater than 80%, right? And we're saying that you have to have a maximum AMI of 80%. So
Yeah,
we need to think about whether or not the wide range of AMIs offsets that, because we have
Offsets
the fact that you had
Yeah.
maximum 80%
Yeah.
in there, because we have one that has 30, 60 in market. We have one that has 30, 50, 60, and 80. And then we have one that has 30 workforce, which is 60 to 80, 80 and market.
Yeah.
So,
I would just say that the intent, it's not clear, it's not perfectly clear when you read the criteria, but the intent was to get 100% affordable units through one of these proposals. And then they
That's
offer
where
the
the
wide range of
value-
AMIs.
yeah.
So that's what I would,
Advantageous, right?
I would nudge the group towards giving NHB the highly advantageous and then have advantageous for the other two. Because they put in the market rate units,
Yeah.
we suspect, so they could balance out some of the pro forma. I appreciate what you said, Salem, but I think it's probably not the intent.
Right.
Their intent was to balance out something with the numbers to do that.
And I have to moderate my intent versus the
Right.
intent. Yeah. It's not always easy, but I'm willing to do that.
And my job is to sit there and say, wait guys,
Right.
that's not what it says.
Right, but how,
So Jeff and I kind of aligned on this one, and I did not show him my scores prior to the meeting.
so how closely do we weight that wide variety versus the 80% max? Like really, according to this criteria, it's not advantageous.
Right, it would be not advantageous,
I mean,
yes,
that would be the box it falls into.
because it has the market rate units. That is correct. Now, one of your questions at the interview could be, hey, tell us about these market rate units.
Yeah.
So why did you propose those when we had a maximum AMI of 80? That
Right.
would be a reasonable question, but yes, for now, that would suggest an AMI, not advantageous for both of those that have market units.
I think in terms of doing the ranking,
Yeah,
if they're both not advantageous, I don't think that's a problem. Because I think they're, both of the proposals that had the market rate would fall into that, number one, get a
Mhm.
one. I think as long as that's consistent, I don't see a problem. Because I think the rest of the numbers will start to sift through.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna be down to basically like a number or two.
Yeah.
Yes.
A difference
Yeah.
of one or two
Yep.
at the end of this.
so, so the next one, so we're good for at the moment, not advantageous, highly advantageous, and not advantageous. So using the three in order of, I put them in alphabetical order to make it easier. Arch, NHP, and Wayfinder. It was helpful that they didn't all start with aardvark or something. So then the next one is retain pep and gym and/or auditorium/cafeteria for public use. Not advantageous is proposal does not retain either the pep and gym or the auditorium/cafeteria. Or the proposal retains either of both spaces, but the respondent does not provide the information requested in sections 3 and 4 about it, so, which we know. Arch did not, and NHP sort of did. Advantageous, its proposal presents an option to retain the pep and gym or the auditorium cafeteria. Respondent complies with the requirements in sections 3 and 4 for the retention of one space. And then highly advantageous is proposal presents an option to retain the pep and gym and the auditorium cafeteria. and the respondent complies with the requirements in section 3 and 4 for the retention of those spaces. So again, this is one that might shift after the interview if they're able to answer the questions.
Well, I had the NHP Foundation and is advantageous. I had Wayfinders is not applicable, and I did not have a ranking for Arch at this time.
This is another of my questions. What do you do with not applicable? Is that not advantageous, or do you get to, because you're
Yeah,
going to
that's
want
a-
to get a
that's a-
zero?
That's a fair
They get a
question.
0.
Yeah, they get a 0.
That affects the final numbers.
It will affect the
Yes.
final numbers, yeah. But that's also because they chose one building, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And so what was the Arch, because I had them as highly advantageous because
Well, they want to use both.
They did, but here's the problem, is they didn't provide the information that we requested for the city to be able to understand the implications. So that's just why you could put them in as highly advantageous for now.
Yeah.
But with an asterisk, basically,
Yeah.
that says, hey, we need to know more.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the criteria, the section 3,
Yep,
right, is if the pep and gym or auditorium cafeteria or both are retained for lease by the city. So I think there was a question about how the space would be
yes.
provided to the city. Then the number of affordable units that could be built in the spaces and the difference in the development cost between retaining the space for affordable units and retaining the space for community use. And then the financial impact of the city, including additional support required from the city, anticipated revenue. And I will just say that I think these are two of the financial impact to the city, I think would be difficult for anybody to provide that information. I think it's gonna be hard. The difference in development costs or the number of units is probably information that could be provided pretty easily.
Cleaned up fairly easily.
Right. So I just
So-
wanted to clarify what those criteria we're asking for.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So for example, the NHP proposal, because I went back and forth on this, they don't actually propose to lease either of the spaces to the city. Right, one of them they're going to develop into affordable housing, and one of them they're actually going to lease to somebody else, 2 other entities,
Yeah.
in fact. So in theory, they don't have to comply with that section 3 because they're not leasing it to the city. Wayfinders is also, I mean, not Wayfinders, sorry, Arch Communities is, I believe, only leasing one of the spaces to the city. And I think in that respect, Jeff, what I'd be looking for is, do they have an idea of what they'd be leasing it to the city for? And, we could, I agree not, depending on how they've set up their performance, not all that information may be available. But they said, we'd use one for a community space, which presumably is open to both their residents. This is a question that I think you want to have clarified, because the community space appears in the Wayfinders as well on the Maple site, is that community space for residents and public. Wayfinders was very clear. I think Arch was a little bit less so that would be a good question to ask them. And then they just said that Pep and Gym could be used by the city, but didn't provide more details, and that's the missing piece, I think, of what those details are.
My concerns with the gym, there's just a lot around the reality of that, accessibility to the gym, how it's going to be heated.
Right.
We're going to have a brand new, fully rehabbed building with an 80-year-old gym attached to it.
Yeah.
There's just a lot. There's a lot to consider around that whole.
And I don't think anybody could reasonably expect that they'd have the complete answer of exactly what's going to happen, but they do have to address that. They can't just say, hey, we're going to leave it to the city,
Well,
to deal with it, or, either one. So I think that's, again, I'm putting the whys in where you suggested for the moment of highly advantageous and advantageous and just leaving not applicable, but I do think that you will want to clarify that in the interview process and ask them exactly what their thoughts were.
So under 2, do they get 1 ranking?
It's one ranking.
One ranking.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say for the purpose of argument, conversation, and to keep us going, I believe that Arch, on the surface of their proposal, would have gotten a highly advantageous.
Yeah, because it's both.
Because because it's both spaces.
It is both
But
spaces.
through the interview process, we should really see if we can get more clarity on section 3, the narrative, like how would they approach it before we make a final decision. That would be, I mean, on the surface, I think that gets highly advantageous.
Is that reasonable? You all agree?
Yeah.
I agree.
But with seeking kind of clarification
Yeah.
through the interview process. Can I ask a question about the interview process? So I had taken a stab, and I didn't get this to everybody, so I apologize, but we have a structure, a tentative structure, and then we were, so like 15, 20 minutes presentation, 15, 20 minutes Q&A. We just created a bunch of questions. So I think
Yeah.
you had said this, one option would be for us to forward them the questions and say you address these questions in your presentation.
In your
Yes,
presentation.
exactly.
And then we could
Yeah.
ask follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're gonna have,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
20 questions and not enough time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think as long as we're agreeable to that, I think we could highlight
Yep.
the important things that we want addressed
And
in the
within
presentation.
the presentation,
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah,
because I think it'll
Are you
relate
going to
to.
use a 40R district?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will this be a pilot model, or will it be LLC ownership and they'll pay
Yeah.
property taxes to the city?
Yeah.
Are you anticipating any tip?
Yeah.
I don't know if building permit fees benefit to the city or not.
I think that's one big question.
That's one
What
big
is the
question,
benefit
yeah.
to the
What
city?
benefit to the
Yeah.
city? Yeah, property taxes, building permit fees,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Agreeable with that idea?
Yeah.
Property management is important,
Yep.
marketing their units to local folks.
And then this most recent one is for the two that have the gym and the auditorium.
Why market rate?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Why did you make the decisions you made, and, you know, what is it that,
Mhm.
that you're expecting the city to do or to, you know, get from? I think we can word that, but,
So we ended up with a highly, for number 2, we ended up with highly advantageous for Arch, advantageous.
oh, I moved it to highly advantageous based on yours, because I haven't heard any disagreement. Did you want to keep that as
For
For Arch.
Arch is highly.
Yes, did you
Yeah.
want to keep NHP as highly or
NHP is,
advantageous?
They were gonna be advantageous because they.
Sorry, I thought I misheard you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then wayfinders would be
They're just
non-applicable.
Not applicable,
Okay.
yeah.
And can you tell me what number 1 was again?
It was, Arch is not advantageous, NHP is highly
Yeah.
advantageous, and Wayfinders is not advantageous.
Okay, that's
And just
good.
again,
Yeah.
just because I know this
Yeah.
is being recorded, this is all preliminary
Yeah.
until after
Got
that.
it.
Yes.
So just wanted to make sure I had that.
can I ask a
Yeah.
quick question about wayfinders on this question? So we're saying not applicable, so it doesn't count against them. However, only developing one school, I feel like it
Actually,
should count against
No,
them.
it does
Well,
count
it'll
against
count
them. They're going to
against
get a
them.
zero.
No.
They're getting a zero, yeah.
Oh, so they get a 0.
Yeah, no,
NA is a 0.
Okay.
I'm probably,
Because not
Should've-
advantageous is one, it's 1, 2, 3, so you're not applicable
Yeah.
is 0.
yeah,
They just
it's
don't
gonna
get
be a
split.
zero score.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure it counts.
Yep.
All right, community connections. So proposal not advantageous, this proposal does not create a space that integrates, I should change glasses here, that integrates identified community desires into the proposed development, and you saw some options there, although it wasn't limited to those. Advantageous, this proposal creates 1 or 2 options for community interactions, and highly is 3 or more options for community interactions. And the idea is that we wanted to make sure that there was, that these weren't gated sites, as it
Right.
were, that there were people moving back and forth, and something that was a public asset remains at least partially a public asset, or asset to the neighborhood.
And then I think, so on the chart,
Yes.
the criteria at the summary of it too, which is that community connections options include but are not limited to public parking, neighborhood playground, and indoor community
Yes.
space. So we did here in the criteria itself, we gave some pretty pointed
Yes.
directions, and in the RFP, it was pretty clear the items that were of importance to the community.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that as a preface to these.
No, I think that's important. And then, so what I had, and if anybody spotted something else, let me know, for Arch Communities, they had a public playground at Maple, possible public parking if they didn't do those 3 families.
Right.
Center, they did not identify anything, or I didn't see that. I think they had some green space, but, and Pepin, they had the gym for the city, and some community amenities in the auditorium space, so.
So they met the 3.
Yeah, NHP had dog park and 15 public parking spaces at Maple, public playground, community garden, and 4 public parking spaces at Center. For Pepin, they mentioned that their pop-up health clinic, I think they said that that would be opened to the neighborhood. But you know, that's obviously a pop-up, it's not a permanent, so just keep that in mind. And then Wayfinders had a playground and park, community room, and 14 public parking spaces at Maple. And then obviously not applicable for Center or Papa, but there are 3 there. So we did not say it had to be 1 per site,
Right.
just 1, 2, or 3, so they had the flexibility there.
The reason I had in my mind that Arch was going to keep that playground, but maybe I'm just confusing my mind.
And I might have missed it too. So
Well,
you
now I
know
can't
what?
find it in there, so I might be starting to blur them in my mind. I rank them all as highly advantageous.
I did too.
Yep,
Mhm.
Okay, so maybe I'm splitting hairs looking for it anyway.
I will slot that in.
It was a little unclear, I feel like, from Wayfinders whether their indoor community space was going to be open to the public. That one wasn't super clear to me. But the way they presented it, it kind of seemed like it was.
Yeah.
That's my sense as well. It was like,
Definitely
well,
gave that
community, are
impression.
they talking about building community?
Their community
Or
or-
community?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I assume they meant the entire.
Yeah.
I see that too. That's
So-
a good question.
I think I assumed it as well, in just my reading of it, but I agree it's something to confirm. So that took us sort of through the community benefits, the top 3. We're now moving into the buildings themselves.
Could we go, I'm sorry, can we go back just for a second? So
Yeah,
the 3 proposals would all get highly advantageous because of the number
yes.
The number of
of
community
Do you-
spaces they're offering.
Do you feel, is there any, maybe it's under responsive design, but I just wanted to ask kind of while we're in between, is the degree to which the proposals provided it, or
I think
the-
that could fall into the responsive
okay,
design.
the viability
Yes.
of what and
Yes.
where, how? Like, 'cause
Yeah.
to me, that was something to potentially distinguish.
Mhm, I think so.
Maybe it's through responsive design. Okay, so I think, then I concur. I think all 3 would get the highly advantageous because they did 3 or more options for interactions. Okay, so I understand that. Thank you. I just knew that.
Yeah, I think the responsive design, so now we're getting into the site and the building. So responsive design, this proposal does not consider either building or site in the context of the existing built environment. So fancy designer way of saying the neighborhood as a whole, and to your point, Jeff, you could extrapolate that to neighborhood needs. Proposal responds, advantageous is it responds to the existing built environment in terms of the design of both building and site. And then highly advantageous is that the proposal is imaginative in its response to the existing built environment. And don't forget in section 3 where we had design goals, these are starting to play in at this point. So that was at page 24, development goals and objectives. So, and some of them in their narrative you could see that, for example, they, I think all 3 talked about pedestrian connections. So you can see in reading through that whether or not somebody was paying attention to this page 24. So we say design that is compatible with and responsive to the surrounding neighborhoods, the existing buildings, and the community's values regarding sustainable construction and site design. So that is sort of part of this here. And I think I'd be interested to hear what you all think of this.
So one thing, Megan, were you gonna say something? Sorry.
This was one of the ones I had the hardest time figuring. I'm like,
There's a little
is
bit
this
of
imaginative? I don't know.
subjectivity.
I don't know if it's imaginative.
Well, that's the word I wanted to latch onto for a second too, because it may not on the surface seem imaginative, but the city did go through a process to do a fit test
Yes.
to examine the viability of keeping public parking and community space together on all the sites. And that was intended and was written as such to be a guide to show what we would hope to see. And so in some level, I see that as being the imaginative
That
part.
or something better.
Right, with
Yes.
guidance that
Yeah.
I'm trying to distinguish, because I think looking at the outdoor areas, that the NHP proposal was much more responsive to the community comments that we received and the fit test that we provided to provide the direction. So for example, with Maple, the public parking is in the same location as we imagined it would be, because it's in closer proximity to Cottage Street. And they worked in a seating area, and they provided the community space facing the neighborhood, which is why we went through that fit test process to do that. And then for Center, it does provide 5 public parking spaces. I do wonder if there could be more, but it is in the correct location to imagine our needs for public parking would be there and the community space stays the same. So on the exterior stuff, I appreciate NHP's response more as being more in line with what we were hoping to see,
Okay.
imagining we would see. So I don't know how much we can distinguish between these proposals that way, but that was my thinking on that one.
Well, so I think that's part of it, is what did the city think could fit on each site versus what each respondent proposed. We also have, for your consideration, a differentiation between the two that went for all 3, in that NHP connected the 2 buildings with a partial pedestrian way on Clark Avenue. The Arch did not appear to do that, so again, that's a differentiating point. Arch has this idea about the lawns on Park Street being available for public use. I don't recall NHP discussing that, although they might have done, I missed it. You know, I can see the green space there, but I don't know that they called it out as a community thing. So there's another differentiation factor between the 2 of them. So, you know, that's working with, obviously in this case, Wayfinders is kind of on its own because it just has the one site, and it has a, because they're proposing a new building, their location of where the elements are is different from what the city looked at, but are they compatible or consistent in sort of the effect that it's trying to reproduce? Something that you might just consider. And this is the hardest, and so, you know, we could go back and do some of the others and come back to this if you
Right.
want. Totally flexible on that, but just sort of.
Before we leave it, I guess the other question to help myself, I guess, would be, would we include the gym and auditorium in 4 as well? As part of
Imaginative design?
the built environment? The design
No,
of
this
building and
was,
site? Okay.
this was intended,
the
I think, to be the
exterior. Okay.
exterior.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my memory of the discussions on this.
That's right.
So maybe as a group, we leave that one for a minute and just
Yeah,
come back to
let's
number
go to
4?
5.
That's,
Yeah,
okay.
and that's fine. So 5 is environmental sustainability. Proposal is not advantageous. Proposal is not eligible for one or more of the certification programs, and we define those. Advantageous is proposal is eligible for lead sites or other relevant certification, and highly advantageous is proposal commits to applying for lead sites or other relevant certification. I think 2 of them mentioned in their narrative enterprise green communities. One of them mentioned passive house. All 3 of them mentioned lead.
Yeah.
So, but the difference is, we did not make it a requirement that you apply for certification because it's very expensive to do that, but we did want it to be compatible with it, and then if you say you're going to apply, then that kicks you up to that next level.
Does Wayfinders commit, do they commit to applying for leads?
I
Or other
think I
pieces?
saw
Committed. You're
Because-
committed
Right.
to designing, developing. according, well, it doesn't say
Ah,
sort of,
yeah.
hold on,
Yeah.
according to the relevant, yeah, according to, not
According
saying,
to, but
yeah.
not committed to apply, yeah.
That's a good question. I just marked that as highly advantageous, then, like, there's the word committed, great. You
You have to read it.
have to read
yeah.
the full sentence.
We had assumed,
Fine
we
print.
had made an assumption that a new build could commit,
Yeah.
whereas the renovation
Right.
was trickier to commit to that, but it's eligible.
Right.
Yeah. So this might be, I mean, I found all three talked about it. I think maybe only one said they would commit, but even then their language is a little nebulous. I think I would recommend asking this as a question. Are you, just let us know one way or the other. Are you actually going to apply for certification, or are you going to make it eligible for but not actually apply for it? Because I think the language in all three was just, my recollection was just, it was a little nebulous, to be honest.
I think I noted that NHP is committed to applying.
Yeah.
And then I think
Yes.
I didn't finish the sentence. The Wayfinders and Arch, I think, are eligible, and say they intend to, or they would, it's anticipated, but no commitment to do so.
So then you could,
So that
for
would
that,
be
put an advantageous,
advantageous.
highly, and then advantageous.
Right.
And then again, come back and look at that.
But for Wayfinders, did we look at their proposed evaluation? Is that the language you were just reading, Megan? So they say, we are committing to apply for a relevant environmental certification for this development.
did say
and
that.
Anticipate that our building will adhere to LEED and/or passive house certification. We believe it is our responsibility to ensure
Yeah.
that we are building it. So I thought I had read that. This is
Yeah.
this is the Wayfinders on page 21. I think
Page
that they are proposing their own score of highly advantageous. I think based on,
Yep.
they are saying they will adhere to LEED.
I think in the letter, they
And/or-
said they would
Yeah.
do it according to the principles, but yes,
Okay.
in the criteria, they said they would adhere to it, so.
'Cause I think that was an expectation of a new
Yes.
build, that
Yeah.
we should be able to get that.
Yes.
Yeah, so then that would
Okay,
be
so
an
that gives them-
advantageous and then two highly advantageous
Okay.
for this.
Yeah.
Who's
Yep.
advantageous then?
Advantageous would be Arch, unless somebody else noticed that they committed. I do
No.
not remember seeing them
No, I'm
commit.
good with that.
Okay. All right, number of sites in the proposal, that's easy. That one I can fill out all by myself. So that would be two highly advantageous and, is that actually a word? And one not advantageous. So, and then retention of existing buildings, it's the same for those. And then new construction, obviously it's a 0 for, well, no, let's see.
So for Wayfinders,
Yes.
for retention of existing buildings, is that a not applicable, or is that a not advantageous?
That is a not advantageous,
Okay.
because it does not address retention of any of the existing buildings or historic components of buildings.
Although they do sort of address it in saying that they're just gonna tear it down, right?
Well, they address it in a negative way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like, do we even give them a point for it, or are we?
Well,
I,
they get the point, because they address it.
Okay.
yeah,
They address it by saying they were gonna tear it down.
yeah, so they
Okay,
get only
okay.
1 point. The other people get 3 points if
Okay.
they're proposing to save all
Yeah,
three.
exactly. Now, new construction is an interesting one, so obviously it only applies to wayfinders. Proposal includes demolition of the existing buildings, or building in this case, and does not include the minimum requirements for new construction in section 3. And then proposal includes demolition of the existing building and meets minimum requirements, is advantageous. And then highly advantageous is proposal includes demolition of existing buildings, goes beyond the minimum requirements for new construction, including LEED or site certification of new structure. So under this, they should get a highly advantageous for the new construction.
Wayfinders?
Wayfinders, yeah.
And there's no score at all for the other two?
There's no, although,
Yeah, I was gonna say the Arch.
Arch
proposed-
does
has a
propose a new
townhouse.
construction.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you feel that they met the other criteria? Did they commit to leads or sites, or did they commit to the other criteria in section 3, which is on page 24 of our?
So they did say, so we're talking about lead again, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that I did find it.
Yeah.
For, it's under, the adaptive reuse of historic buildings will incorporate many sustainable green, and so then they say it's anticipated the project will receive enterprise green community certification as well as pursuing LEED certification.
Okay, so they
Yeah.
did say that, which
Yeah.
means they
It says
did.
it's anticipated.
Yeah.
But that's
Right.
the same as commitment, I don't know.
They're all
Yeah.
anticipated.
I think they're all
Okay.
anticipated.
Yeah.
All right.
So does that change
Yes,
their
that makes
score
them
from
highly
above?
advantageous.
Yes, it does.
But they don't get anything under new construction because they're not demolishing any buildings. So they're,
That's Arch,
that's Arch.
but they are proposing the townhouses that would be new.
Yes,
So-
Yes.
that comes under the environmental sustainability. All right, here's a fun one, control. So we've left the buildings now, unless you want to go back to the responsive design at this point.
But if we go back to, so we have retention of existing buildings and new construction,
Yes.
which is a total of potentially 6 points. But for 2 of the proposals, we're saying it's really only out of 3. We're just giving it a not applicable.
Yes.
Mhm.
But Wayfinders gets to be out of the potentials. You know, see what I'm saying? Like we have,
They're offset each other because they committed, so each of them are getting 3 points, but they're getting it in 2 different categories.
but Wayfinders is getting an additional one because they addressed that they're not.
Oh, I see what you mean.
see what I'm
Yes,
saying?
I see what you mean. You're right. That should be a not applicable.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good point. So
And-
it's, you're either
one or the other.
retaining them
Yeah.
at a certain level, or it's new
Okay,
construction
that-
at a
I feel
certain
better about
level.
that.
Yes.
You get a 3 for one, you get a 3
So that
for
was
the
your
other.
point earlier about they offset each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 6 comes in on the
Yeah.
number of
Right.
sites
Okay.
in the proposal. Yes, yes, you're
And-
quite right.
Another, so for new construction, and I'm trying to find it in the RFP, there's no, it seems counterintuitive if there's new construction proposed, but they're not demolishing something, they're just proposing new construction, there wouldn't be some sort of accommodation for new construction without demolition of something. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It was because the new construction, the criteria around that was based on them meeting the design criteria, that it had to be suitable for the neighborhood, it had to have, at the highest level, it had to have the leads or sites.
Yeah.
But the environmental sustainability also works in that favor for the ones who retain the buildings.
Okay.
So, now if you disagree, I mean, you guys are the committee, I'm just giving you the input to how we were thinking about this before, so.
I mean, I could be off base here, but it does seem to me that if one of the projects is proposing new construction that is in line with the previous construction, that counts for something.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm with
Am I
you.
wrong?
I'm with you, except when you look at Arch, because they proposed the townhouses, they
Yeah.
are quick to say that could alternatively be public parking.
Right. Well, I thought they
And-
also said that if they put it up, it would be a barrier, a natural barrier to parking.
Oh, see, we should
Maybe I read
reread
it.
that because I
Let's
read it
reread
as
Okay.
we could build the 4 townhouse units,
Or,
but we would also consider that to be public parking as well. And I would say that a proposal that does not include public parking at Maple is going to have a hard time getting through the
Yes.
approval process of city council. So I don't think we would pick the townhouses over public parking.
I think you might want to include that in the responsive, when we go back to responsive design
Okay.
and think about that. I think you want to include your estimation down there.
Well, the above does not reflect the scenario. The submitted site plan does show location of the 4 townhouses
Right.
in a location that's currently asphalt.
So in other words, they would have more units if they did the townhouses.
Right.
Fewer units and more parking if they did not do the townhouses, but they left about 4.
But the numbers that they show here
Do not include.
do not include, so
yeah,
we should
right.
not score the new construction.
right.
Does
Yeah,
that
'cause
logic
Jeff, you're right.
follow?
It says,
Okay.
as noted, additional parking can be provided in the location where proposed townhouse units are shown on the plan.
Yeah, so it's an either or, you're saying?
It seems
Yeah.
like, but I feel
Yeah.
like I saw somewhere else they were talking about using those townhouses as a barrier to having
I think
other
it's a
parking.
barrier to the tenant parking,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
think that's
protected.
what it is.
I think
Yeah.
that's what it was, yeah.
It's the next
Did you
sentence
find
there.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be
Three
better
bedroom
on
housing
visual
while also
screen,
creating a
yeah,
buffer to the larger
parking.
parking area and further defining housing along Maple Street.
Yeah.
But it is buffering the tenant parking, which would be the larger
Yeah.
parking area.
So we're at almost 5:15, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more, only 4 more to go through.
Just one more, folks.
4 more, and I think there should be relatively quick, and then we have to go back to design. We've kind of been doing the questions as we go, so I'm less worried about that, but I do want to confirm who's asking them. So control, proposal required, this is not advantageous. Proposal requires city to maintain and control the properties for more than 18 months. Advantageous is less than 18 months. Highly advantageous is minimizes the amount of time. We were aware that financing, the timing of when the decision happens versus when the funding rounds happen was going to adversely affect when control could take place, so we didn't want to make this too tight. I think that almost all of them were getting close to over. Yeah, so Arch was 30 months from designation, as I read it. These were a little nebulous, as we talked about
Yeah.
before. So this could also be something to make your lives easier, that you waited until after the interview to score, so that you
Right.
get a firmer answer. That's an option, so.
And then, so you said the Arch was 30 months?
Yeah, they said it in text.
Okay, and then do you know, did you have any,
Both
Wayfinders
NHP and
was 22.
Wayfinders was fall 2024.
Yeah.
So that would be about 22 to 24,
22,
depending
yeah.
on,
and NHP was the,
also fall 2024. As far as I could tell, I was looking at when things, they didn't actually say, they weren't specific as to saying, but I was looking at where the financing came through versus the others to try and figure that out. So it looked like it was fall 2024. That's why I suggest we may want to ask them all for.
and if I'm, oh, go ahead, Salem.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it looks like Arch potentially increased their offer to the city for the buildings to help offset
Yes.
that extra.
Yeah.
So that should
That
be
might be a
taken into
discussion.
consideration.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too, because Wayfinders has 22 months, but no opportunity for the city to offset those costs at any
Right.
point.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
true.
And then Arch was the one with the largest acquisition price, right?
Yes.
And the longest time, so that
Right.
maybe they did try to at least balance that.
That's what they say in their
They were
narrative.
attempting to.
And that's where 9 and 12 for them probably fall, because although, they have a longer timeline, 12, which is a pro formas, has that line for direct financial benefit to the city. So, and there's a 2-parter in the pro formas to keep in
But
mind.
regardless,
Yes.
they're really, all 3 are not advantageous. They all fall over
Over the
18
18
months.
Yeah, over
Yeah.
18,
Yes.
so.
I mean,
So for this, yeah, I agree.
Everybody gets a 1?
Everybody
Yeah.
gets a 1. At least they're all in the same.
They're
Yeah.
on the same boat.
Now, financial status, so not advantageous. Proposal does not include a letter of preliminary interest or bank references, do not indicate a familiarity with funding sources appropriate for the project of this size and complexity. Advantageous was the letter of preliminary interest matches needs in pro forma, and the bank references indicate a familiarity. And highly advantageous is significant expertise. I think they all had similar funding sources. I think we've already talked about the fact that Arch did not have that letter of preliminary interest, the other 2 do, so that would be the big difference. But we've already talked about, we know, we know that Arch has familiarity with
Yeah,
funding
yeah.
sources. It's clear that the others do as well. So again, this may be something that we score now and then rescore after the interview, so.
I have a question here. So
Yeah,
Wayfinders provided
we provided quite a few letters.
under, I think they, in my opinion, they appear to have provided enough to get highly advantageous because the expertise and funding sources appropriate for the projects.
Yeah,
Wayfinders?
Yeah.
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 And then I just don't recall what NHP provided for that.
They had, they actually gave us their full set of accounts, but they
Yeah,
also
they did.
had financial,
Okay.
which we didn't request in that respect, although it does
Yeah.
answer the question that we asked. But they provided at least one letter. They provided a letter from Mass Housing Partnership. Yeah.
So in theory, that could give them a highly advantageous, and then because we already identified the lack of the bank,
Yeah. It was,
it gives, I think maybe this is where it came from, is that they opted for the bank references
yeah,
rather
but they
than-
all mention letter of preliminary interest.
Yeah.
Oh, they do?
All three of them.
Mhm.
Proposal does
But-
not include a letter of preliminary interest, is not advantageous.
But it says
Or bank references.
Right,
Or bank
right, right.
references.
Yeah, or bank references, that's
So-
why I was mentioning.
Yes,
references.
yes.
But then the next one is letter of preliminary interest.
Matches the needs.
And there's no option for a bank reference.
It said, no, it says and bank references
Oh.
indicate a familiarity.
Okay.
So I think there was assumption that, that they would all have had that letter of preliminary. I think it's an easy thing to fix, frankly. This is why it was a minor thing. We just have to get a letter from the bank that they've got as a permanent supplier, so. Permanent funder that they've got in their bank references.
Oh, that would, are they not advantageous? We're talking about Arch, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about,
Yeah.
we haven't called the bank references yet, so I
Okay.
think at this point, because they don't have the letter, they're not advantageous.
Mhm.
But that can probably be fixed
could,
by a
yeah.
call, yeah, exactly, or by their discussion. Okay, 12.
Whereas NHP, sorry, NHP and Wayfinders were both highly advantageous there.
Yes.
We thought, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened.
Did we do experience?
Oh, yeah, no, we
No, we
didn't, I'm
didn't
sorry, I
skip
skipped right
experience.
over it. You know what is, I put the yeses in experience that we're supposed to go into control, because my hand slipped, so let me fix that right now. Experience.
More than 3 completed school buildings in Massachusetts.
Yes, so NHP themselves don't, but their partners do. That was the thing there. So 3 or fewer completed projects involve reuse of schools or buildings of a similar scale for Housing Massachusetts. 3 or more than 3 of all of those. And then if they propose new construction, their projects have to reflect the experience of new construction, which I think is true of Wayfinders, so
When I
that's an issue.
did the research on that, at least what I found was that all of them had more than 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're all advantageous there. All right, so then pro forma, so this is a 2-part. One is, they've said they're going to do community benefits, is that actually reflected in their pro forma? And the second part is, what is the direct financial benefit to the city? Lower, consistent with, or higher than other proposals. This is the one that we actually compare to each other. So, and as we've talked about, we're missing some information, or it's not quite clear. So again, this is something that we want to come back after the interviews.
And so does purchase price fall under this category?
Purchase price would fall under this category, so.
The one thing, and this is good, my one other note on this item that we didn't explicitly say before was CPA funds.
Yes,
So, Arch does not list CPA anywhere.
Yes.
But they have a category for DHCD, ARPA/other. So I was hoping that through the interview process, we can clarify whether
yes.
there was any intent to have CPA lumped in that other, because it's a lot. It's 3.85 million.
Yeah,
So I that was the question I had with Arch, whereas NHP proposes $1 million from CPA.
okay.
And then the Wayfinders proposal had CPA, but I forget the number off my head.
And do we have access? I mean, I know that
500,000.
500,000.
I know that CPA has dedicated funds for affordable housing, and that a while ago we split the CPA into different categories, and affordable housing is one of them. I feel like it has a pretty big balance.
I think you're right.
I don't remember what that balance is. Do we know what that balance is, though?
This group does not. I could explain it in general terms. That if we were only dealing with the schools and the possibility of $1 million requests, there is sufficient funds for that.
Yeah.
But we have other affordable housing projects
Right.
in the peripheries that would also try to access CPA
Sure.
money. So
Well, that's why I'm wondering what the balance is, because I feel like I know that there's a specific
Yep.
line item for affordable housing.
Yep.
And I feel like that every year it gets an allotment, and that's probably been getting an allotment for a long time.
the due diligence we did do is so Valley CDC was assisting the city as well. In a public way, the information that they provided us was public information. And
They
through
looked at
that,
various sites across the city.
yep, and they also looked at the school buildings and helped with the fit tests. But what they did identify was a rough number of $1 million, no, it was $900,000 would be a reasonable CPA request to expect coming from the
From
three
schools.
buildings. Yep.
Okay.
So we brought that to the CPA, and they did not make a financial commitment,
Right.
but they acknowledged
acknowledged it.
the potential for a $900,000 request
Yeah.
to come as part of the schools. So that
That's good to know.
has been, the CPA is aware of that.
It's on their radar
The thing
screen.
that's not aware is timing of other projects
Other
coming
projects.
forward and accessing the same
That may
money.
have as high a priority as these
Right.
projects.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think that this is a two-part question at the interview, or pre-interview for them to address. Part A is, what are the revenue sources to the city from your project, right? One of you, two of you, actually all three of you have proposed purchase prices of varying amounts. We know that there will be building fees, there may or may not be property taxes, et cetera. And then the second part of that question is, what is the ask from the city? Are you expecting the city to contribute? Because that DHCD ARPA/other could be DHCD's ARPA, or it could be DHCD, we forgot a comma,
Yeah.
ARPA/other.
Or we
So,
could just be other.
Exactly. So, I think for all of these, there needs to be that, what are you expecting from the city? What are you, and to be fair, that was supposed to have been called out based on the instructions, so all three of them
All
fell down.
three
So
kind of
again,
waffled
yeah,
on
exactly,
that. Yeah.
the city is kind of waiving a little bit for everybody on this, so they should be very specific about what to expect. So, I always love it when you think that you've written this like airtight to get the information, and everybody finds ways of getting around what you've asked, so. But I would recommend that. So I think for now, again, you could, if you wanted to go ahead and score something on that, you could, or you could wait till after the interview. I don't think there's if you wanted to take a crack at it.
Just going to caution the committee, we can ask questions at the interview. We
Yeah.
cannot ask them to supplement their proposals at this point.
Right, they need to
Right.
answer through the
Yeah.
interview.
Yeah, they can
not
answer
provide
through
us
the
reams
interview,
of paper.
but
Yeah.
we're not going to allow them to say, oh, that was missing, let me give it to you now.
Yeah.
Score me higher.
Yes.
We can't do that.
Yeah, but part of your interview evaluation is going to be, we've got this bit about not clearly explaining and not being responsive to the questions of the evaluation committee versus clearly
Yeah.
and being responsive. Part of this is if we give them these questions and they're not
Yeah.
giving us the interview to
Yeah,
your
would
satisfaction.
you care to clarify?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
we know if they're serious. If they can't
Right.
clarify, we know there's an issue.
Exactly, so do you want to score the pro formas now? We're missing the pro formas and we're missing the responsive design. Those are the only, other than the interview itself, obviously.
It's 5:30, folks.
Yes. 5:28.
5:28.
5:28. 2 extra minutes.
Should we finish the design portion?
Do you want to jump back to design?
Yeah.
All right. So this is that responsive design. Do they include, are they taking into account the built environment? In other words, are they being respectful? The taking into account the built environment in terms of buildings, if they're keeping the buildings, we're just making sure that they're rehabbing them, right? They're making them look better. And I think all of the two that are keeping the buildings did talk about using the exterior, the historic rehab standards for both of those. proposed. So, and then it's also, what's the design of the site? And I think Jeff's point about what the city already looked at versus what came through is a good one to test the responsiveness. So, are they being responsive to neighborhood needs, knowing what's on the site now versus what was proposed? And also, they all talk about pedestrian connections, so I don't think there's a difference there, but it's really, it gets back to that, the playground, the green space, the public parking, lighting I think they all address
Well, I'd
lighting.
first say no one's not advantageous in this category.
Yeah.
They're all either going to be advantageous or highly advantageous. My preliminary scoring was Wayfinders was advantageous, Arch was advantageous, NHP was highly advantageous. And I think I marked it that way because I really liked the way they treated, maybe I just like the photograph, the way they treated Pepin and
You have to be
and
careful with
Center.
those good renderings,
That's what I
right?
was gonna say, is the fancy one.
Yeah,
Is
well,
always
Yeah.
the best.
yeah.
My concern with that is the two houses between on the opposite side of the street and how those play into, because those are still private, those will be
Yeah, those are
private
private
That's a very
residences.
good
Yeah,
point,
Someone's-
yeah.
There's something to discuss
Yeah,
there.
does that become, I mean, I defer to the DPW director on this, but does this become a roadway?
It is a roadway.
It is a roadway,
Yes.
yeah, so it would have to be abandoned as a roadway for this to become a public park.
I think in their map, they identify it as an emergency vehicle access.
I think they've got those bollards.
So the fire department
emergency
recently had
things.
us take that gate out that was there.
Yeah.
And
I saw
that,
that.
and it is it's a public way. It's not the city at some point gated it for the schools to, the students to go in
I think
between.
it was for
but-
buses to go through
Yeah,
and.
and the students to walk for lunch from,
Right.
so.
Yeah, and so that's a key difference between NHP and Arch, is their different treatment of that street.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for me, one of the important differences for responsive design is that NHP understood the importance of public parking. And having been at this for 5 years, just knowing that was always a main theme and concern.
Yes.
So they were responsive. I think they imagined what the city had been hoping for with the exterior. So to me, that is really important and powerful. The issue that I'm grappling with is that they treated the gymnasium in a way that doesn't correspond that way in terms of the community input. So
but I
they're
think
different
that's a
things.
different,
They are different
that's a
things.
different category.
Different
yeah.
category.
But we didn't break up. We did, like the pep and gym is a lump.
Yeah.
It's kind of a lumped category. So that's my biggest challenge, is I think that they went on the responsive design, highly advantageous, whereas Arch was not as responsive with their exterior design. If you just look at parking, or actually the playground space is a little bit better oriented with NHP's design as well.
Well, I think the renderings are also better. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah.
Because, one is hand-drawn and one is like fully high-scale, like
Right.
computer graphics.
And that was the nature of the question that I was hoping to get at, is sort of have them sort of describe their approach to the community benefits. And I do have to wonder about Arch, which has the hand-drawn schematics, if that was intended to show that their plans are more malleable.
Flexible. That's
They
the
suggest
impression I got.
some flexibility, because they could do townhouses or they can make it parking.
Yeah.
I would love to understand both of their perspectives on sort of the gym and auditorium plus the exterior treatments, and understanding, are they rigid with that or are they flexible?
I think that's a reasonable question for both of them to answer. I think the distribution of amenities is also different between the two. So for Arch, you've got the public playground, maybe public parking at Maple, nothing identified for Center. Their diagram, their plans show, green space there, but there's no public amenity identified there. Pepin, they talk about the lawns, but other than that, there's no specific, hard to do that at Pepin. And I'm not talking about the interior, obviously. for NHP, again, on the exterior at Maple, they've got the dog park and the 5 public parking spaces. Center, they retain a public playground and the community gardens and 4 public parking spaces. And then obviously Pepin, they've just got an interior. So again, a little bit of a difference in the distribution there. But I agree, I think asking for the approach to both interior and exterior community benefits from both of those. And that's actually a perfect discussion for Wayfinders as well, because you have that question about the community room.
Right.
You know, how accessible to the public really is that going to be? You might also ask Wayfinders about their choice of putting a playground park to the sort of the corner of the property, right? That's actually at the corner intersection.
It is.
And that's an interesting choice for something that's going to be used by children. So I think it's a fair question for all 3 of them. So again, you might want to do an initial one now just to see where you are, or you could just wait until after the interview to score this. So either way would be acceptable.
I'm not sure that my question fits it totally into responsive design, but I wasn't sure where to fit it in.
Yeah.
So as you're thinking mostly about Arch and NHP and what they're proposing with the gym and the auditorium, it sounds like NHP would be working with these other third-party places to have like functional spaces by the time the project is done. There would be a minute clinic or whatever it's going to be, and a theater, whatever, and that is included in construction and renovation. And I can't tell with Arch, is it just truly they would leave that first floor as is? Would they be taking on some of the renovation so it would be usable?
The accessibility part of it anyways.
Right.
You make
They
it accessible.
talked about for the auditorium area, the community space, fitness area, there was something else.
Kitchen.
Yeah.
So it sounded
yeah.
like that is good. That sounded like more like what NHP was saying. So does
Yeah.
that mean because they didn't say something for the gym, that would be just like we don't touch that bottom level?
Again, I think that's a very important question to ask them, is what exactly is their intent for the space, for the parts that they
Yeah.
think are publicly accessible,
Yeah.
how publicly, what do they mean by that?
Yeah.
I think another fair question for NHP is going to be, it's great that you've identified this for a community theater space, but, what happens if that doesn't materialize? It's great that you identified this actually the pop-up health clinic is a really interesting idea, but again, what happens if that doesn't materialize? That is a commercial use, by the way,
Yeah.
so that's something else to consider.
That's what I even thought they said in urgent care.
Yeah, urgent
Yeah,
care,
urgent
but they
That's
talked about it being
different, right,
pop-up,
yeah.
and I would definitely
Yeah.
question them on that,
Yeah.
because, it's unusual, it's creative, but how does it actually work,
Yeah.
right?
And why those two things? Why the
Yeah.
theater and a pop-up clinic? Like,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah,
To me, that's this like sticking point between Arch and NHP is
yeah.
I can't quite tell what they're going to do with the gym or the auditorium
The other
for either.
Yeah,
It doesn't make sense to, I don't know how familiar other people are with the current use of Pepin, other than during the school day, but it is used pretty much year-round, and it's kind of this quasi through the rec department. So it's used for youth basketball during the winter months. It's used for adult open gyms.
Not this winter.
No,
not this winter.
No, last
hasn't been
winter.
used for anything.
And
Hasn't been used for
it's been
anything.
rough at the
Oh, right, because
new
the
school.
school's
because of
closed.
that.
Yeah, it's right, yeah.
Okay.
But historically,
Oh, okay, I just
Yeah.
was wondering if,
Historically.
okay.
yeah. And it was the rec department that had a staff person there
Sure.
Yes.
to supervise. But yeah.
I think it was identified as a community desire, and then I think the closing of it and using the new space at Mountain View I have heard even more strongly. We've had kids practicing at 8:30 at night, like,
Yeah.
fifth graders.
And is
having
that something that Parks Department is integrated with, or is school alone?
I don't know. I think maybe it's just school, because there's not this, but if we can get the gym back up, that was really what but I don't know, is that even part of what Arch is really doing? I think that's a key.
That's going to be important for
That's
us.
a huge piece of this for me, because the community really wants another place to have a gym.
Yeah.
And so part of the way to get to that is going back to section 3 So I think we all agree that neither of them really articulated certain things. And so it's the difference in the development cost between retaining the spaces for affordable units and retaining the spaces for community use. And it's in parentheses leased to the city. Plus the financial impact of the city, including additional support required. I mean, I think that's what I said before. I think that's a hard thing for them to forecast. But if they are going to tell us that all management of the space is going to be on the city, that'll give some indication.
Yes.
And on the same point is whether what Greg was saying is, are they going to renovate it at all? Because this accessibility to the gymnasium has been questioned, where the locker rooms are above grade, accessible by a lift that we don't know if it meets a code or not. So getting clarification on some of that would be helpful.
What I'm worried about is like the economics around using that gym. And when the time came for them to actually do it, how much it's going to cost, and then where that cost will get passed to the city, and how.
Right.
And then
Heating costs, maintenance
the gym
costs.
cannot be heated independently of the whole building right now.
Right.
So there's going to be a cost associated with heating. It's going to be a whole new heating system to heat that portion
So
of the building.
that
So
was
there's a lot
part
to-
of what we were expecting to hear, right? Is had they thought through
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we were trying to understand is the difference between retaining the gym for city use versus turning it into affordable housing. How many housing units are going to be lost? So we know, for example, with NHP, you would lose 7 housing units because they were going to put 7 loft-style units in there, right? So what was that impact for Arch? They didn't say how many units they could turn that into, so we don't have that comparison.
Sure.
Yeah.
They just said, so that's where it was, and that they should be able to tell us what the impact is of using it for units or not using it for units. So we kind of get that across the two of them.
One hypothetical.
Yeah.
One real question and one hypothetical question, but I'll do the hypothetical first. If we preview that we would like that information and we're still not satisfied with the way they answered during the interview, could we continue our process and continue to ask for more information on that? It does give
I'm
us.
turning that to Mike.
Okay.
If we asked all 3 for the same additional piece of information,
I would recommend against it.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was going
Because
to
you
Even
go.
kind of
ask
open up,
everybody?
you can open up a can of worms. I mean, you open up, oh, well, you're letting us resubmit for this. We would like to keep
Yeah.
up this part of our proposal too.
Yeah.
Because we noticed in the interview question, someone focused on that.
We
Right.
watched
Yeah.
your committee meeting and we saw what you were concerned
Right.
about. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's if they are not responsive in the interview, then that gives you part of your answer.
Okay.
Now, I could see them saying, hey, we just received the questions, we're not ready to have an interview this week because we think we're going to need to get more stuff together.
Yeah.
That we should probably talk about what that means for
Okay.
the timeline.
Okay.
But.
And that goes to my realistic question is, I had a hard time setting up the interview schedule, so it is proposed for Monday at 4 for Wayfinders, Tuesday at 4:30 for one of them, and then Wednesday at 4:30 for the other. So does that schedule work generally? Because we're trying to be we're trying to provide an efficient process, but I do think we can ask them to front load a lot of this information into their presentation
Yes.
and then ask questions.
Yes.
But what I just heard is that we kind of have to then gauge next steps based on their responses without asking for a lot more information. Okay, good.
Well, I mean, I think their responses will tell you what you need to know.
I'll tell you, and then,
Yeah.
and then that gives
If
us the
somebody comes in and
resulting
says,
rankings.
oh, we never even thought about X after,
Right.
an October to January process of
Right.
them being able to do their due diligence,
Mhm.
that does tell you something useful.
Yeah.
Or they may come back and say, we thought about it, but we really think this needs to be a conversation with the city, then that also tells you
Yep.
something about, what they're doing.
Because at this
So-
point, I'd be inclined to not want to give them a lot of extra time, because what we would be trying to do is go back to this RFP section, which has been out since February.
Right.
So it's not as if we are creating another, like that was our goal, is to ask these questions in line with either their response or the
Right.
RFP itself. So I think we should try to stick to the schedule. Most of them have responded with basic questions about how do I get the meeting link? So
Right.
I'm pretty sure
Right.
they're all ready and available.
Yes.
So I think my personal position would be to trudge forward I think all the stuff we're asking is just clarification type things.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're asking for a lot of new information.
Yeah, it's sounding mostly like clarification from what you've already said. So I have not scored the interview for obvious reasons. I have not scored pro formas, and I have not scored responsive design at this point. Is it helpful for you all to know what the scores currently stand at? Or is that not helpful?
I'd be interested to hear.
All right. General? Yeah. I mean, once you all hear, anybody watching this also hears, so just know that. Okay, so again, in alphabetical order, Arch has 21 points so far, NHP has 24 points so far, and Wayfinders has 18 points so far.
That's about how I expected it to
Yeah.
pan out.
Maybe a part of this question about what's going to happen with the gym and the auditorium is part of the pro forma stuff too.
Yes.
But if we're buying, or how much they're going to purchase for, whether or not there's going to be tax benefits to the city,
Right.
then wraps it into who manages the gym and is it, city? Yeah, it's all.
There's a lot to it.
There's a lot to
Big
it.
ones out there.
And there, this looks very objective because it's like, did
Yeah.
you do X, did you do Y? It was intended to be that way. But again, because of the interlinking of some of these pieces that, their responses at the interview. It's funny, I think we had one committee member who's like, why do you even have the interview in there? Because of course they're going to be responsive. Well, actually, it's not as cut and dried as that. And so this is where getting those questions set will be important. So just to confirm the questions I have, I know you were taking lists as well. So I have, who's going to own the property and who's going to manage the property. Question again about the finances. So that total package of, the property taxes or the building permits, other fees. how
Pilot
much-
agreements.
Pilot agreements,
Ultimate ownership.
TIF, exactly. I think I said already who manages it, whether or not they're using 40R.
Mhm.
And we're pretty sure the answer is yes in all three cases, but it needs to be confirmed.
Expand on marketing and outreach to.
Marketing and
local-
outreach, yep, exactly. Expand on the timeline in more detail, exactly. So to the best of your knowledge, when in the process does the city hand over control and therefore responsibility for costs? Address your thoughts on, for the two that it's appropriate for, the gym and the auditorium. So, the missing information there, what you were thinking about that, what you were thinking about the other community benefits, how do these tie together? In the case of anything that you're anticipating the city taking over, how you see that working. Asking about CPA or any other funds that you're anticipating from the city versus your purchase price. And then I think for wayfinders who obviously are not going to get asked a question about the gym and the auditorium, I think your question is going to be, why only one school? I think that's
Right.
reasonable. And they addressed it in their proposal,
They
that's
did.
fine, but I think it's worth hearing that from them as well, so,
Can I ask one thing that might
Yeah.
fall into the question category, but I think it's
Sure.
in Greg's wheelhouse, which is, I'm trying to remember if any of them talked about public infrastructure updates when they were doing these constructions, because that seems like a natural fit with some of these things, but I don't remember seeing it in any of the proposals. Is that something we want to ask about? Greg, do you anticipate that being an issue, like a Maple School tying into a 100-year-old water line?
Maple School will need a new water service.
Like that type of thing, which I don't think we've talked about.
I don't think any of the proposals really got too much into it. Remembering that.
that might then be, because that's part of the who's paying for what and total benefit to the city, so I think that's a good
I
question.
know we got reach outs from the proposers when they were on the street, and we were asked, will the city seek Mass Works funding for public infrastructure improvements adjacent to these properties? And we answered in the affirmative.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to do that. An affordable housing project makes our Mass Works application more competitive.
Yes,
We know
absolutely.
that the infrastructure, public infrastructure surrounding these properties needs improvement. Sidewalks, roadway, water, sewer, public playgrounds, sure. If we can fund it, sure.
Yeah.
So
and I'm really sorry for fumbling through here. I do recall, okay, so NHP, I thought NHP had MassWorks incorporated somewhere. One of them had reference to MassWorks as a funding source, which was
That's good to know.
In their pro forma?
partially by, okay, it is NHP, sources of funding, MassWorks was $1.5 million, and that is based on the same fit test that we did.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was some, and it's in the RFP, there was some, we did identify that we would potentially support the preferred
Yes.
developer through MassWorks for things like public parking,
Yes.
including potentially the on-site public parking.
As
We did on
well as
Ferry Street,
off-street public
and
parking.
off-site, and
You know,
then
the
water,
engineers may look
sewer.
at that area and say, hey, we can
Yeah.
fit in
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
7 on-street public parking spaces
Yep.
here. We're gonna encourage them to do that.
Yeah.
With the- Yeah, I think that wasn't anticipated though,
Like-
especially with Maple Street, the leveraging of this
Mhm.
project to upgrade the water and sewer
Yeah.
on Maple
Yeah.
is important.
Yep.
Yeah.
It looks like Wayfinders acknowledges and it says they're gonna work with the city to further develop those infrastructure plans. NHP mentions it.
Yes, I remember
I
that.
don't
Yeah.
see Arch
Yeah.
mentioning it anywhere.
It'll come down a lot to how they plan to plumb the interior of the building.
Right.
and
Yes,
the
yeah.
way the way it's kind of constructed inside.
Mhm.
And reusing most of the existing utility connections, I think, isn't realistic.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And part of it is that so, sorry if this is not relevant, but, you know, these buildings haven't, the exterior of the buildings and the surrounding neighborhood hasn't been touched because it's been the same use over time.
Right.
Yeah.
We would love to leverage the project to upgrade the sidewalks, enhance the
Yeah.
crosswalks,
Yep.
Yeah.
and do that on each of the projects. So that is definitely on,
That's our plan.
that is an approach we would like to take.
So two other things that you might want to consider. One is asking them just in general why they picked the unit mix and the affordability mix that they did. Because Arch comes up with 61 units and NHP has 69 units. And there's a different breakdown of, you know, Arch has a studio, they've got the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. NHP doesn't have studio, they have 1, 2-bedroom loft, as we know, and 3 bedrooms, so that's something to ask. And then, of course, they have different affordability mixes, all
Mhm.
3 of them. So I think that's worth asking that question. And then the other thing that's in there, and our criteria don't really cover it because we weren't expecting necessarily to see it. NHP offers a lot of additional services to their tenants. And that's just, I bring it up because it was in their proposal. Again, our criteria doesn't quite hit it. So you might want to think to yourselves whether that enters into our conversation, because it is in the proposal, and if so, what might it fit under? So just to call that out. I don't see that the others they had different ways of addressing their tenant needs, and it would be worth looking at all 3 proposals again to see what that is, so.
Folks, it's 5:52. I know
Yeah.
Jeff has a hard stop very
Yes.
soon,
Right.
correct?
Yes.
Uh,
But I did want to say something. So on the agenda, we had public speak.
Exactly.
And there's, okay, we're gonna do that, okay.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the end of the meeting is gonna be 6 o'clock. Jeff's got a hard stop at 6. I know we have public speak on the agenda. There is a member of the public here who's been extremely patient. I want to give this person an opportunity to comment if he wishes.
And I was going to ask, because Andrew and I have spoken, would you be agreeable to limiting your comments to 2 minutes or so? Is that acceptable to you? Okay, that's good. Okay, thanks.
There was mention of Arch's proposal for some townhouses off on one of the corners of the property, and the possibility that could be switched to parking. At what point would that decision be made? That modification, if you will? Because I think as their current design plan has the townhouses over there, sure, because it's going to make them more money. But at what point would there be a decision made by this body here or the city and Arch itself as to whether or not that's going to be parking or townhouses?
All I can say is it won't be a decision made by this evaluation committee, because our charge is simply to evaluate the proposals that have been submitted based on our matrix of goals and objectives for the project. At some point, the city, whether it's the mayor's office in conjunction with the city council we'll negotiate a purchase and sale, property disposition and development agreement with the preferred developer.
So that would be legal.
And that's going to be when the opportunity, when that entity would negotiate final construction document, final makeup of the project.
So that's legal to do that once a developer has been chosen over the other two?
Certainly, yeah, but it's not the purview of this committee because we're simply
Right.
evaluating what's been submitted and then passing on our recommendation to the full city council.
Okay, just real quickly then.
And I'm just going to caution, public speak is generally not ask questions, it's simply public speak.
Which you can ask questions, but we generally don't answer.
Generally don't ever answer them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, my wife and I own a couple storefronts up here in Cottage Street, and there's a parking problem up there. Recently, we just had to sign a towing contract because we couldn't get into our parking lot behind Book Moon Books, which we own that space there. And we own it jointly with 3 other businesses. And there's at peak periods, there's lots of pressure on the Cottage Street Cultural District for parking. And people are starting to park on Adams Street and infiltrate the residential neighborhoods as well. And I think that it needs to be noted that Maple Street is really the last chance that we have to add parking sufficient to allow not only healthy businesses down here, but also growth. And with the addition of the package store development up here, hotels, and the Maple Street School, you're going to be putting a lot more pressure on this end of town for parking, particularly since there's no real commercial parking. There's 3 spaces being allotted for hotels development in front of us here, but that's in no way going to accommodate the businesses, the customers that might want to use those 3 potential businesses on the ground floor. And that's just the beginning. And we're not really looking at a healthy parking issue for this end of town, now or in the future. And so I would just say that when you're rating, please give due consideration. I spoke with 14 of the business owners up here last week, and they're all very concerned about parking, just for the health of their businesses. And because they can't rely on just local people, they rely on people throughout the valley and the hill towns to come in and shop. And I mean, if you live here, you understand that this gets really jammed up at certain periods. And you come up here at night, with now that the Marigold's open, and I assume that that's who's parking in our parking lot. It's just putting more pressure on that area down there. So I urge you to, when you're grading, to think about parking at Maple Street. And hopefully it would be a lot the size or that it would mirror the existing public lot across from Book Moon Books now, which is a great little lot.
So, thank you. I think this is.
I got to stop you there. Yep.
I had
for your
recommended
comments,
you submit the comments to the city council in writing. That's definitely going to be the preferred next step for your comments, but we've heard it.
Yep.
The interviews are next week. They're been advertised as a public meeting, so you're welcome to attend and listen.
Yeah.
But I want to say that one of our questions was aimed at hearing how they treated this in terms of their proposal, and that'll be informative for us. It'll also be informative as one preferred developer moves forward.
Yes.
Then the conversation shifts to city council. So we can communicate about how that steps on. We don't have dates yet, but that'll be the next opportunity.
Yep. Thank you.
And if I can ask as a point of clarification, the Arch Communities proposal right now has the parking, and it would be an alternative plan to put the townhouses up. Am I understanding that?
They've shown the
Correct.
townhouses on the plan as an option. They basically said it's an option.
It's an option.
We're showing
But
it
it's-
to you this way. We recognize that we could do it this other way, but they both, so, they've put it as an either or.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
But their
so I think
like model number of units.
their
does
model
not
number used
include-
is not included
Does
in the
not.
So that's,
townhouses.
yeah,
correct.
I just think that's an important point of
Yeah.
clarification.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Committee members have any other, anything they want me to hear from them, or Emily, or any member to hear? I want to thank everyone for their time this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
And next week.
And next week. Thanks, folks.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.